You know, regardless of whatever else we talk about with this season finale, the Kyber Crystal lorehounds are going to have a field day with this one. Hello, interwebs. I hope you're all doing well. I am here to review the Season 1 finale of Star Wars The Acolyte. This episode titled, I don't know because I didn't look it up, and I should probably have done that before I started the review. I'm a professional. It is called Episode 8, according to Disney Plus. So I have no idea what the finale is called. That was totally the case the entire time. I totally knew that and was just playing a trick on you. Anyways, let us get into this finale. So I was, judging from the comments on last week's episode, I was actually one of the few people that liked last week's episode on the whole, despite my, reservations here and there that I talked about in that review. However, what I will say is this episode retroactively made last episode worse in my mind, because it's not the first scene of the episode. We'll get there, but I have to talk about it first because it was the thing that blew my mind. That was the choice that they went with, because I had assumed when we were watching last week's episode, considering that the episode before last week's episode, the end of episode 6, ended with Soul telling May as he strapped her down to a table that I'm going to tell you everything, and him having said I'm going to tell you everything to both Osha and May several times throughout the series, that when we got the flashback episode last week, that was Soul telling May everything. But apparently, we come back into that scene, and he hasn't told her jack shit. He hasn't told her a goddamn thing. Maybe, presumably, you could say maybe he's, reiterated some points, there is a gap of time there, but, given the fact that we saw in the flashback this clear statement of, Osha and May are the same person, clones of each other, are virgins in the Force, whatever you want to call them, and then it is very clearly pointed out that May does not know that information here. It really couldn't have been Soul telling the story. So either he said some amount of stuff that's ambiguous that we don't, as the audience, don't get to know, or he didn't tell her anything. Either way, it's incredibly frustrating and just a wild creative choice, and it's even more frustrating when he is literally about to tell her the most important piece of information that May did not know, because presumably May already knew the rest of the story anyways. It was Osha who really needed to hear the story, but before he tells her the one piece of information that May has, she zaps him and gets away into a admittedly fine, action sequence of them flying through an asteroid, cloud field or whatever you want to call it, but I'm like, what? And it makes the other choice about both flashback episodes even clearer in my mind, because the first flashback episode is very clearly from Osha's point of view, and then the second episode was from Soul and May's point of view to a large amount, because I would say it was mostly from Soul's point of view, but then we also get to see May's perspective on the fire. So again, I kind of had this thing of okay, so it's like a Rashomon, different perspectives on the same story sort of thing, though Rashomon has a little bit more of their own tellings of the story in that story. So here it's more objective, but it is perspectives. And I figured Osha and May are talking to each other. That's where we're getting their perspective versus Osha's very limited one in the first episode. But nope, that's not the case. So it's just we get these two objective flashbacks that just happen without there being, narrative justification for them to happen in world, and that's fine, but I think ultimately just is the weaker creative choice, especially since you set them up to be that way. I don't know, just giving us a way into these is this is the perspective of these characters doing something unique with these flashback episodes, instead of them just being objectively the author saying, and now we're going to tell you only this half and only this half, is really frustrating, because it as the viewer, what that is telling me is the author is intentionally keeping these pieces of information from us in a very overt way of we're not going to tell you this piece of information even though we're telling you an objective story. And while that is always the case with a story, you get a little bit of leeway with that when you are having a character sort of present their perspectives within the story, and that's why you're getting that. It was a little weird in episode 3, but it's even more so with episode 7 that is the case, considering there was a clear setup for that. And it just makes the manipulation by the author even more tangible and felt, and thereby more frustrating. Like, the author's always manipulating. That's what stories kind of are. They're manipulating your emotions through the things that they present, but just the overtness of this in this way really weakens that. And so this episode and that creative choice frustrates the hell out of me. The other thing that frustrates me about this is at the end of last week's episode, and kind of throughout the entire season so far, is we had got a sense that Soul had felt guilt over what happened. And the end of last episode kind of felt like it made clear that, like, Soul sort of realized the mistake he had made. And maybe not fully getting there, but overall had just realized that there was a mistake that he had made, that by pursuing these kids, and that, Trinity, Carrie-Anne Moss, had basically kind of made that clear to him. And the events that transpired are clearly on his hands. And yet this episode, Soul, the entire time is like, no, I did what was right. The only thing I feel bad about was that I couldn't save May, and that I lied to you about that. And that is enough to make him feel guilty, sure. But, like, he has no perspective on anything, and that's fine, but he seems at least like a kind enough guy and an empathetic enough guy to have gotten there on his own. And it's just kind of, it just makes Soul even more dumb and frustrating and kind of cruel in a way. There's this whole, like, element of this character that would have felt a bit more tragic if he had realized his mistake. But then at the end of the episode, I'm kind of like jumping around here, apologies, but I'm sort of on this train of thought here. At the end of the episode, when Osha is killing him, it would have felt more tragic if he knew his mistake and accepted it. And you get this acceptance, like, it's okay when he says it's okay to kill me, I guess, is the thing going on there. But that's less impactful when he doesn't have that sense of guilt, and he never presents that sense of guilt from that. It makes it feel less. It makes it feel emptier, where he's not kind of self-hating because of that, and that tragedy of, like, Osha going, like, her Kyber Crystal bleeding, and her becoming essentially on a path towards becoming a Sith, or whatever form of dark side user you want to call that, at this point in the timeline. Like, it makes it a little bit hollower. And that just feels very frustrating. So just, like, the choices and characterization with him is just weird to me. The other element of this episode is we get the sensory deprivation tank helmet, and then Osha gets a vision of May, like, about to kill a Soul. It just feels like a weird thing to introduce at this point in the story, you know? Like, it just, like, okay, it feels like it's just like we need some reason for Khmer and Osha to be going after May and Soul, so we'll just introduce this little plot line here, and have her have a force vision that will send them to go and meet them on Brendok. And it was just and then the other question to me came up was like, well, why does Khmer care so much? I mean, I thought he'd given up May for, like, I don't give a shit about her. And I guess the idea is that, like, he wants to get May and Soul so they can't reveal his existence, which is, is there, but it's never stated clearly that that's his goal here, that he wants to kill them both to cover up everything. And so the fact that it's not just had me, like, going, like, huh? What? So that was just a little bit weird. The other thing, too, okay. Sorry, you can clearly tell I am frustrated with this finale, because I can tell that Leslie Headland, the creator of the show, has, like, more. I mean, this show ends on a cliffhanger, but, like, she clearly wants to, like, tease, like, ooh, I have connections to other things going on. So we see that shot of this dark force creature hiding in the cave, who looks to me very similar to depictions of Darth Plagueis from, like, Legends images and things like that. So I'm like, well, is that Darth Plagueis? I don't know. We just get a shot of him, and I really want, like, that was the thing. I'm like, ooh, I'm interested in that. Tell me more about that. And we just get a shot of him, and it's very much set up for season 2. And it's just like, honest to God, I would have much rather not see that thing's face, whatever it is. Maybe just see a hand. But now I'm just, like, even more frustrated. Like, you can't tease me like that in a very frustrating finale. It was a little tease too far, I feel like, maybe. Perhaps you'll disagree. Maybe I'm nitpicking. You know what? I'll pull that back a little bit. I've maybe nitpicking a little bit because of my frustration in the rest of the episode, but it was just one of those things where I'm like, man, I feel frustration in the rest of this episode, and that's the thing that I kind of want to know more about, and we just get a little tease of it. Alas. So there's that. So I guess I'm a little bit more frustrated than I should be at that. but it's there. I'm just laying that out on the table. All right, let's talk some positives, though. Also, Kamir has the ability to teleport, I guess. I don't know what that was. He's like, I'm gonna get ahead of you. That was weird. But regardless, despite the fact that he can apparently Voldemort apparate places, I will say the fight between Sol and Kamir was badass. However, it does lead me to questions about Kyber crystals. Because, okay, when he pulls out that, like, little, like dagger, a lightsaber, coolest thing ever. That was just, I'm like, woo, I love that. I love, like, locking it in, like, tossing it, the thing where he throws both of them, and then, like, Sol has to, like, kind of push back all three of them with the Force, the two lightsabers, and Kamir. Cool. Like, that was probably the second coolest fight in the entire series. One of my favorite lightsaber fights, period, that I've seen. And it's only second only in this series to the one episode, what was it, 4 or 5, something like that. So badass. Very great. However, Kyber Crystal question. Would that mean that there's 2 Kyber Crystals then in that lightsaber? Because if he pulls it out, like, the lightsaber requires a Kyber crystal, no? Maybe there's some lore that says it can, like, break apart for a little bit, like maybe it's a half and half Kyber crystal, or like it can go like store some power of a Kyber crystal for a short period of time, maybe. But it would feel like there's 2 Kyber crystals in there then if he has 2 of them, presumably. Unlike maybe Darth Maul's, which, like, maybe it, like, you know, just shoots out 2. I don't know enough about the lore. People in the comments can tell me more about that element of lore, but, like, I'm just curious about that. I was just like, especially, and it would be less, that would be more like a nerdy question to me. At first I'd be like, I was thinking that when I watched it, I'm like, that's a insider baseball nerdy question that no one's going to care about. Except they do bring up the Kyber crystal later. and we get to see the piece of lore that I did know, that when a lightsaber turns red, it's because someone did, like, a dark side thing and the Kyber crystal bleeds. That it was really cool to see that. But because I saw that, it made the question about the Kyber crystal earlier more relevant, because we were actually seeing, like, I'm willing to, like, forgive like nerdy pedantic lore questions like that, and like leave that to just like, oh, I'm curious about that as a lore nerd. But when you do draw attention to the Kyber crystals later on in a different lightsaber, to be fair, but still, it does make me say, like, well, then the question becomes slightly more relevant, does it not? So there's all of that. Okay. Not done yet. So yeah, the lightsaber fight was very cool. And I will say the rest of the emotional elements of this episode were solid to me. Osha and May confronting each other, and May telling Osha, you know, you were never able to deal with your negative emotions because Sol caused them. Loved that. May's anger at Sol, despite my critiques of, like, Sol's characterization making it a little bit more hollow, but May killing him and turning to the dark side was really good payoff. Wish Sol had been characterized better in this episode, just like in this episode alone, to make that more powerful. But it still landed decently enough. But it just would have been better if Sol had some level of guilt about any of his actions, I feel like. But still was strong. And I did really like Kamir kind of standing there and just watching it happen. It was actually very cool. It was like, shit's going my way. Just gonna let this go on. We also get a couple other things. Venestra. It is confirmed that Kamir was a Padawan of hers, which is also probably why Kamir said to Sol earlier in the show, you don't remember me, because Sol probably taught him as a kid, but didn't remember him because he was just like one of tons of students, presumably. But yes, Venestra clearly has a history with him that will probably get pulled out in a season 2, if and when we get that. I'm trying to think what else there was to... the other big thing, the other element that I did like is we get David Harewood, Warlin Door himself. That's a reference for some of you out there. If you know that reference, I adore you. You're one of my favorite people. But Warlin Door himself, David Harewood, is here as the senator. Weird to introduce this, we got a little, notions of him from earlier in the episodes, references to him by other senators and those calls with Venestra, but it's weird to, introduce him here, especially an actor that I really love, because it's like, oh man, I would have loved to see him more throughout the season. He's interesting. And, I'm not someone who's in love with, politicians overall. See my other videos on this very channel to hear my thoughts about that, or my thoughts on Star Wars as a whole when it comes to politics on my main channel. I did a whole like 6-hour video on it that I'm really proud of. One of my favorite videos I've ever done. We did a whole animation for it. Please go check it out. I know it's long, but trust me, breaking it into chunks, it's worth your time. But regardless, the dude's on right and every money. I love his point of being like, the Jedi have unchecked power. And I love his point of like, you say you can control the uncontrollable, which is not the Force. It's your emotions. And then he sort of, gives this like illusion. Obviously he doesn't know, but the show kind of alluding to Anakin of like, someone's going to lose their emotions and it's going to cause problems down the line. Kind of alluding to Anakin Skywalker. But even Soul kind of there's an interesting thematic resonance with Soul, like kind of, doing that. I really loved that point that he was making. Still kind of goes to like, yeah, the Republic if it hadn't been for the Jedi going wild, then it's like, I would have rather critique of both the Republic and the Jedi. But still, did appreciate this element of it, like the Jedi being questioned. Like that was cool, especially Vanestra at the end, kind of like covering it all up and putting it all on Soul to cover up her own ties to what's happening here with Khmer and all of that jazz, and to make things sort of neat and tidy for politicians. Like it's showing how the institution, even if they aren't directly involved in the actions of Soul, will cover up their tracks and protect themselves. Loved that. Great point. More of that, please, next season. That's cool stuff. Interesting stuff to me. Even though Vanestra I find to be, I don't know, the actress is fine, but she's been told to like kind of portray as like every scene feels vaguely sinister with her. And I would like a little bit more nuance with her character. Like she's just sort of like politician-y Jedi. And if we're going to hinge such an important rest of the storyline with her, in this show, going forward, I hope we get a bit more nuance with her. And there's chances for that. She's not really been front and center this season, so there's room for that, especially since we lost so many characters this season. So that kind of wraps us out towards the end here. The other thing is I'm going to sound like a hypocrite because I did my own movie that has an element of memory wipe storylines, but I'm not a big fan of memory wipe storylines when presumably usually they lead towards a character just not knowing information for a certain amount of time and then they will get their memories back. I'm fine with memory wipe storylines when a character starts off with memories being wiped, which is the case with my own movie, or if a character gets memory wiped, like that memory's never coming back. Now, such might be the case with May, but presumably not, considering they like make reference to the fact that like she wants her to find her again and things like that. So like, I don't know, what my hope would be is that she never gets a memory back. Like, just do not do that. I always find that just annoying. It's just a type of storyline that I just get annoyed by. It's my own, this is a taste thing for me. People may differ on it, but it's just a taste thing for me. So I just hope she never gets a memory back. I mean, this is just May going forward. But we'll see how that all shakes out. And then the last little piece of this is that we get to see Yoda, which, I'm of two minds on. We'll have to see where it goes, but like ending on Yoda at the end here very much feels like that fan servicey thing of like, ooh, look, it's Yoda, which they have been mostly avoiding. The Kyandi booty aside, which was its own whole discussion of people being idiotic bullshitters of like, oh, you ruined the Kyandi Moody age, like you ever gave a shit about Kyandi Moody's age at any point before you wanted to shit on a show that you're blaming as woke. That's a different point. But stuff like that, I'm like, whatever. He's off the side. I don't really care. It's not that big a deal. Putting Yoda like this of like, it's Yoda, does very feel much like the fan servicey thing of like, oh, look, you're going to get Yoda next season. Isn't that fun? But that being said, he is around at this time. And these events do seem momentous enough that he probably, considering, I think he still has a pretty decent high place in the Jedi Council at this point in the story of the universe, that he probably would be brought into these events. So like, it is a bit fan servicey, but if they handle it well enough going into season 2, I will be fine with it. It's just at the end here felt very much like the heavy-handed like, and we got Yoda. So I don't love the presentation of it here. I would have preferred it just having him in season 2 like that. Honestly, I get the impetus to want to do that. That my taste is just not, especially since we got the Darth Plagueis tease. Honestly, it probably would have been better to me if they did the Darth Plagueis tease at the end of the episode, and ended on that instead of bringing in Yoda. That probably would have worked better for me. Regardless, that's my, again, that's it's more of a taste thing on my end. I can kind of go either way on it, and I see how it works. So, yeah, that's kind of overall my thoughts on this episode. I've been just sort of ranting here. Obviously, I think my overall thoughts are fairly negative on it, with a couple positives here and there. I do not have the time at the moment. I'm in the middle of finishing up a big video for my main channel and then working on another big video. And then also I'm making my pitch deck to start pitching Identities, my movie, as a TV series. So I'm in the middle of a lot of work at the moment. In fact, I'm ending this review and then immediately going to work on more editing. So a lot going on here, but if I have in the time, I almost want to do an entire video essay on this series for my main channel, because I'm just fascinated by this show. Because I've said this numerous times, but on paper, this show is everything that I want from a Star Wars show. And in some senses it delivers, like the action, amazing. And on paper, of like questioning the institution of the Jedi, getting to see a different era of Star Wars, you know, kind of dealing with more perspectives on the Force than just Jedi and Sith, and calling into the question the Jedi's very binary view of that. I think are all things I'm like, hell yeah, love all of that. But the execution has been so frustrating and so just not very good in my mind, and I'm sad to say that it's very just anger-inducing. And then you add on top of that the culture war bullshit that has come with this show. That's like, man, I wish I could fight that anti-woke nonsense, right-wing bullshit, and be defending a better show. Because, like, man, I love everything the show wants to be. I love the show that the show wants to be. I don't love what the show that it show is, and I want to defend the show that the show wants to be, and I'm frustrated that I have to defend the show that it is, because the show that it is I don't love, but the anti-woke brigade are gonna sell their outrage merchant stuff. So yeah, that's overall my thoughts on this episode. I'd love to hear your thoughts, though. I might end up doing a video on this on my main channel, but it would definitely not be in for at least another month, probably. But if I do it, I will do it. I will do it. Don't test me. But with all that said, I hope you all, my friends, live long and prosper.